For Pierce Brosnan, the magic of The Wizard of Oz was more than cinematic. It was formative.
You're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
The film wasn't just something he watched as a child, it became part of his early experience as a performer. After graduating from drama school, he found himself in a stage version of the musical, playing multiple roles that included a dancing skeleton and a chocolate tree. Reflecting on that period, he said, "I did it as a musical when I left drama school. The movie is kind of indelible in my head." That impression never faded. The 1939 film had everything that stuck with Brosnan over the years: fantasy grounded in real emotion, iconic performances, and a score that lingered. But it was Judy Garland's heartfelt delivery of Over the Rainbow that remained with him longest.
Over the rainbow, skies are blue.
It was the type of performance, he later admitted, that showed him the power of pure feeling on screen. "It's a film that hits you in the heart," he once said. "It doesn't matter how many times you see it." This early encounter with such an emotionally rich film laid the groundwork for Brosnan's lifelong appreciation of cinema as more than spectacle. He began to look for films where characters carried emotional complexity and stories resonated well after the lights came up. That search eventually brought him to one of the most influential films ever made and one of its most magnetic stars. When asked about his favourite films, Brosnan never hesitates to mention The Godfather. For him, it wasn't just a cinematic achievement, it was a masterclass in storytelling, tone, and performance.
They've helped us in the past with gambling and other things. They're gonna refuse to help us when it comes to narcotics.
Huge fan of Marlon Brando, he once said, "For this man to come out of the shadows playing Don Corleone was just captivating." Watching Brando in that role made something click for the young actor. This wasn't just acting, it was something primal, something that came from deep within. The way Brando held a room without raising his voice, the texture of his speech, the stillness in his eyes, Brosnan saw it all as deliberate and devastating. "He doesn't move unless he has to. That's power," he said in an interview. It was a kind of cinematic gravity that Brosnan would try to emulate in his own career, particularly during his years as Bond, when he realized that subtlety often landed harder than bluster. What The Godfather taught him most of all, though, was the value of a well-constructed ensemble. No performance was wasted, no frame was idle. It instilled in him a respect for collaborators, the crew, and the storytelling process. Every part of the film moved the narrative forward, and everyone had a role to play in that. That lesson lingered as Brosnan's tastes shifted towards films that examined human vulnerability with the same precision used to portray power. Among the 5 films Brosnan has cited as personal favourites, The English Patient is the one that tugs at the heart most insistently.
Let me tell you about winds. There is a whirlwind from southern Morocco, the Ajej.
He calls it a film that leaves a mark on your senses, and it's easy to see why. With its sweeping landscapes, doomed love, and poignant soundtrack, it's a film where the silences speak louder than the dialogue. And in Ralph Fiennes, Brosnan saw a kindred spirit, a classically trained actor with the ability to make restraint feel riveting. Ralph Fiennes is a spectacular actor, Brosnan once said, and the romance of that film, with that music, it just stays with you. It was the kind of film that seemed tailored to every instinct Brosnan had as an actor. Every movement was controlled, every line considered. The aching loss at the heart of the story mirrored the kind of emotional terrain Brosnan himself had explored in roles like The Matador or The Ghostwriter, where past pain bubbles quietly beneath the surface. What makes Brosnan's admiration for The English Patient all the more striking is that it nearly cost him the role that would define his career. In the mid-1990s, as GoldenEye was preparing to relaunch the Bond franchise, Brosnan was also in serious pursuit of the lead in The English Patient. "I wanted it so badly," he later admitted. "I thought that role was going to be mine." But producer Barbara Broccoli reportedly felt that taking on such a vulnerable, wounded character so close to Bond's revival might dilute the image of 007. The schedules were too close, the tones too far apart. In the end, Brosnan stepped aside. Ralph Fiennes took the role and earned an Oscar nomination, while Brosnan secured his license to kill. Years later, he spoke without resentment. Ralph was magnificent. That film was poetry. But you can't do both. Bond needed everything I had. That crossroads cemented Brosnan's belief in commitment to character and in the weight that a single role can carry. It also deepened his appreciation for the emotional precision that great performances require, something he would find again in another film from the same remarkable year. When Pierce Brosnan first saw There Will Be Blood, he was stunned, not just by the visuals or the score, but by the presence of one man, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Aren't you a healer? And a vessel for the Holy Spirit? When are you coming over and make my son here again? Can't you do that?
Every time he steps on the stage, you know you can't take your eyes off the guy, Brosnan said. And in Paul Thomas Anderson's epic, Day-Lewis didn't just perform, he detonated. It was the kind of performance that commanded absolute attention, even in silence. What Brosnan appreciated most was the commitment. Day-Lewis wasn't acting a role, he had transformed into Daniel Plainview, a man driven by ambition, loneliness, and rage. The authenticity of it fascinated Brosnan. He carries it in his shoulders, his walk, his voice, it's complete, he said. And while Brosnan himself had long been celebrated for his polish and charisma, watching Day-Lewis showed him what was possible when all that was stripped away and replaced with raw force. There Will Be Blood was also a reminder of the power of contrast. The stillness of a man surveying a barren landscape made the eruptions of violence feel seismic. The sparseness of the script allowed every gesture to matter. Brosnan found this particularly instructive. In his own career, he had often played characters who were expected to charm, but There Will Be Blood made a case for menace and obsession as equally compelling qualities. That lesson was driven home even more strongly in another film released that same year, which Brosnan believes formed a perfect cinematic bookend. If There Will Be Blood was a character study in madness, No Country for Old Men was an existential spiral into chaos.
An ATM.
I know where the satchel is.
Brosnan called it outstanding, praising both its craftsmanship and Javier Bardem's unforgettable portrayal of Anton Chigurh. He haunts that film, Brosnan said. You're terrified of him, but you never quite understand him. That's power. It was, in Brosnan's view, the mark of an actor who knew how to weaponize ambiguity. What struck Brosnan most about No Country for Old Men was the way the Coen brothers trusted the audience. They didn't spoon-feed motivation or wrap up endings neatly. They let the tension build through silence, through what wasn't said, through wide desert shots and sudden violence. That narrative restraint was something Brosnan admired deeply. They did outstanding work as writers, directors, and producers, he said, noting the film's complete control of tone and pace. Bardem's performance, in particular, served as another example of the actor's presence. Like Brando before him and Day-Lewis alongside him, Bardem understood how to hold a scene without forcing it. Brosnan recognized that instinctively and has tried in his own way to do the same. These 5 films, distinct in era and style, each left their imprint on Brosnan, shaping how he understands cinema, how he approaches performance, and what he values in a story. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Pierce Brosnan's favourite films, you won't want to miss our next video exploring the actors who shaped his craft. Click the thumbnail on screen to keep watching.